Hello, my fellow explorers. This is Christian. I am coming at you from Kernville, California, which is a tiny little town at the foothills or the beginnings of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, about an hour outside of Bakersfield, California, where I just recently finished up a epic kind of life-changing festival, Lightning in a Bottle. My first time at that festival, and that was still processing it, still epic. So I wanted to share this conversation that I had, actually not at Lightning in a Bottle, but a couple of months ago. I had this conversation in Sante Fe with Michael Garfield. He is a really fascinating person. He's the host of the Future Fossils podcast, which is how I came to know him. If you like this conversation at all, you have to check out Future Fossils. Michael's just a very articulate and deep thinking person with a very interesting background. So his day job is at the Sante Fe Institute. He's a science communicator, I believe. And Sante Fe Institute's known for its complexity science. So, he's around this like cutting edge research and communicating with these thinkers and just a very interesting mind. And I'm really grateful to have been able to meet him and have this conversation. He's also a musician and has spent a ton of time performing festivals, also talking and speaking at festivals, and has his own music that you can find. I'll actually drop some at the end of the episode so that you can kind of get a little glimpse into that side of what he creates. But Michael's a fascinating dude. I bumped into him. I basically cold emailed him, and he was receptive, and I showed up to his house in my van, and we had a conversation outside of his house on the street in the van. So it was really, really awesome that he was able to make time for it. This is a short episode as he has a lot going on. Obviously, he's a father, he's got his family, he's got his job, he's got this podcast, he's got, I think another podcast he's involved with. So there's a lot happening. And he was able to carve out like an hour and a half to talk to me. So I was super grateful for that. But this conversation goes into everything from, psychedelics to origins of, man and civilization, and sort of some armchair philosophy. It's a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you do, definitely check out Future Fossils, check out Michael's work. And so, if you want to connect with Michael, you can just find him on Twitter. There's @MichaelGarfield, just like it sounds. Where he'll have a link that you can check out his music. He's also an artist, so he's got his art available there. And that other podcast I mentioned he's part of is the Complexity Podcast, the Sante Fe Institute. So be sure to check him out. And if you want to support True North Project and you're stoked about what I'm doing and what we're doing on the road here with this sort of van life odyssey that we're on, you can check out truenorthproject.com, where you can subscribe to our mailing list, which will give you updates about what we're doing, where we're at. When stuff is dropping, you'll be notified. And there's also a link there on the website if you want to support us financially through Anchor. You can donate if you'd like to. It's also, if you want to support us, you can also do that in other ways, like leaving us a good review, whatever you're listening on. And if it's YouTube, subscribe. If it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever, just give us 5 stars and share it with a friend if you think it's dope. I'm not going to get too long-winded here because we decided to take the storytelling of, kind of what's going on in the van life side of things to keep that, kind of relegated to our storyteller episodes. So keep an eye out for storyteller episodes if you're interested in diving into that, like, how Lightning in a Bottle was and what we've been doing outside of just recording these conversations, and more of like the van life side of things. Those conversations will usually be between Lily and I, or, maybe if we bring in other people, that might happen as well. But the other thing to mention here, just real quick, is I decided to yank the video element out of the podcast because it was just adding so much friction and causing a lot of it was over encumbered in a sense, just sort of kind of making the process of recording and editing and releasing a podcast just have way more friction than I'd like it to. And since I decided to make that decision, shout out to Forrest Landry for helping me make that decision. It really just feels like a whole weight's been lifted, and it feels so much better. And now I can feel like I really just get on a roll and start releasing episodes, which I have a bunch of them in the queue. So once again, this conversation is actually back from March 22nd when we were in Sante Fe. And actually, shout out to Michael Garfield because he put me onto Meow Wolf, which if you have the chance to check out Meow Wolf in Sante Fe, you absolutely have to. It's fucking amazing. So yeah, with that, I will shut the fuck up and let you enjoy this conversation with Michael Garfield with Future Fossils. Enjoy. This will be the shortest podcast of my life. I have a hard time. I'm long-winded, so I have a hard time.
I know. I saw your shows were like 2-3 hours long, and if this were not such a busy day.
No, it's fine. I really appreciate you making time for it. So no stress about the time. Honestly, the fact that you were receptive and that you let a lunatic in a van just drive up to your house and put you in front of a mic is pretty cool. Given that I have, no rapport, it's pretty sweet that you said yes. And we just talked about why, because of the synchronous kind of true north stuff going on.
Yeah,
from your past.
Yeah, totally. My dad his home being named True North, and my stepfather used to work for True North Financial Investments, and I just got my compass repaired, which is like my like sacred object. It's the compass and the guitar.
Yeah.
So
those are good objects to have.
Yeah. So at any rate, yeah, it's funny. I almost said let's meet down at the park down the street, but then I was like, but what if I'm murdered?
It's better to be murdered in front of your house. People will probably catch on faster.
They'll know. Anyway, no.
Well, you'd be the first murder that's gone down in the van.
He can't be running a business and murdering people, can he?
Yeah, it'd be bad to be putting that on the internet. That being said, I've got a few since I started this road trip. I've got a few episodes in the pipe, but I actually haven't released any yet. So I guess it's still on the table that I could be murdering my guest. No, I just so I want to do a little bit of like platonic speed dating real quick, just because we're not going to have a lot of time. I would love to dive deeper into your story, but you mentioned being an artist. I mean, I've seen some of your art. You're a musician. You're hosting a couple podcasts. You've got this background in evolutionary biology and paleontology, and jack of all trades. A lot going on. So when you meet somebody and they want to know what you do, how do you describe yourself?
I tell people I'm a context provider.
Okay.
And a rift navigator. Rift in the way that my friends J.F. Martel and Phil Ford talk about rifts and zones on their show Weird Studies, which if you don't know about that show, I highly recommend. They claim they were inspired by my show Future Fossils, but now they have 4 times as many Patreon supporters as I do. I think there's something about the buddy dynamic. It's like a cop. Like there's the 2 cops in the patrol car. Like right. that trope, that genre is really. But at any rate, they talk about rifts, and they talk about basically like the difference between the real lowercase r and the real uppercase r. The uppercase real is always destroying your efforts to model it, which is something that I feel very vividly working at the Sante Fe Institute, which is obsessed with, complex systems modeling and the necessity of theoretical pluralism. Like they're not actually looking for a grand unified theory of everything, because that's absurd. Like theories are evolutionary products. They exist in an ecology of minds. They're context dependent. Everybody's got a different background, different training data. And so at any rate, the rift is between your conditioning and the uppercase real, right? It's between the world that you've come to expect based on your childhood and the world that continues to out-evolve us and surprise us at every turn. And I think that what we need, and what I was just telling you before we started, I was talking with Jonathan Rosen and Benita Roy and Ashley and Jason of the Doomer Optimism podcast, and also Stephanie Lepp of the Center for Humane Technology. It was an insane conversation about the role of people who are acting as like cartographers, what people would call like sense makers or systems poets.
Way showers, essentially.
Yeah. The people that are doing reconnaissance and ranging and pathfinding at the edges of the known and the knowable, and why that's so important, and why I understand that I understand the critiques that people are like, everybody's podcasting. Why don't you just shut up and do something? Shut up and but the fact is, as Stephanie pointed out in this morning's call, that knowing and doing are non-dual. That words have knock-on effects and ripples out into the world and affect the way that people believe and behave, and ultimately everybody on that call, and yourself and I are, we're all practitioners of something, and this is, the meta that occurs through talking about this stuff is not separate from, or in any way I understand, in contest with actually enacting change through planting a garden, raising children,
right.
Incubating turtle eggs, as I am now in my house.
Nice.
All of these things, teaching and so on. So anyway.
Yeah. Being that kind of context navigator, right? Like the riff navigator. I really like that. I feel like I've experienced in my short life, huge, many times I've had like the kind of veil pulled back where you see the rift. You know what I mean? Where you're like, oh fuck, I don't know what I'm talking about. I was born in a really small town of fundamentalist Mormons, and I grew up polygamist and really kind of a small worldview, which is, we don't have to dive way down in that rabbit hole because we could talk about that worldview or whatever. But to be able to make the leap bridge the gap, I guess, go beyond that, beyond the pale into the unknown, and then realize in hindsight later, there was just this rift between me and, all of this other information out there, all this other stuff that I hadn't really considered because I was pigeonholed into one sort of dogmatic ideology. And this kind of like pluralistic theory thing that you're talking about is very far on the other side of being kind of pigeonholed into one way of thinking and seeing the universe through like one dominant narrative. It's kind of like we take a lot of different threads that make the tapestry, so to speak, right?
Well, okay, so just out of curiosity, one of my biggest inspirations is Eric Davis. I don't know if Expanding Mind and Technosis and High Weirdness. He was the one who introduced me to the fact that there's actually a thick seam, a compatibility or a history or an intimacy between Mormonism and transhumanism. So I'm curious, were you a Mormon? Was that the soil? Because there's that whole thing about like graduating to being the god of your own world.
Yeah.
And then also, and in that respect, maybe that's the belt buckle between these two things, right? That connects them is the idea that the cosmos is proliferating and multiplicitous.
Yeah.
And that there's even like deity status is proliferate, and so you get something approximating that kind of like evolutionary Big Bang cosmology, and espoused by physicists or the quantum multiverse that people like Sean Carroll like to talk about. And so you get a different you get a sense in which you can restore through this sort of I understand. I have other formerly Mormon friends, and I understand it. It's weird. But I think there's still there's an escape hatch if you really want to get like mystic with that particular cosmology into the kind of stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is. I was talking to my friend Aaron about this actually in our Zen room at True North, and we were talking about kind of how Mormonism did sort of push the envelope in some ways on the current kind of way of, I don't know, like just the standard narrative and the status quo around Joseph Smith in the 1800s in that area. A lot of like Puritan kind of Protestant, whatever thinking, and, becoming like a god or becoming a god rather is completely taboo, off limits, like blasphemy, heresy, right? Because it's like, how could you ever, you're this like kind of lowly little creation of the creator. So to be putting yourself up on that pedestal, even if it's in some afterlife, not now, but later, is kind of a step. Yeah, it's kind of a step for people to take at that point. And then to go to, the next step, which is like, well, maybe you're actually the whole goddamn thing right now. You're just like a little fractal element of it. Maybe the universe is playing hide and seek and, getting lost and pretending to be or getting lost in the role of a person. And then maybe once in a while finding itself, I
wrote a song about that in 2007.
Of course you did.
Called Tin Heart. Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Yeah, you got some dope music, by the way. I listened to a little bit of it. Really, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a mashup of like kind of, it's got like almost native notes and like almost like you got like a cool synth going on that reminds me of like a didgeridoo or something in some of these songs. And then like you've got like a kind of almost a folk vibe with like cosmic sort of thing. It's super fucking cool.
You're talking about using the ebow on the guitar through the bass pitch shifter pedal and the wah.
Yeah.
So you get these weird bass synthesizer kind of drony. Yeah.
Do you do all this shit by yourself?
Yeah. I just published a video of the live set I just opened for Devotchka at Meow Wolf last week. It was completely awesome, and you can see I'm not the guitar I've been using lately doesn't do. It doesn't have a magnetic sound hole pickup like the old one, so it doesn't have some of those things I can't do as effectively on the new instrument. But you can still kind of get the idea for how I'm like layering and structuring everything.
So you're not using a synth at all?
No.
Jesus, that's fucking cool. All right, so I do want to ask one more quick kind of small talk question, just because I want to know you a little bit better. So I stole this question from Elon Musk. He asked, I guess, new hires.
We should steal more from Elon Musk. I mean, he's got plenty.
He's got a lot to give. So what are the three biggest decisions or choices you've made, and why'd you make those?
Well, one of them was to apply for this job at SFI.
Sante Fe Institute, for those who are...
Yeah, one of them was because I had been living in Austin for 7 years, and I'd been languishing there, really. I mean, I made a lot of friends, and I wanted to stay there, and yet I was just sort of eking my way along and fairly miserable. And I'd been in my relationship with my partner, off and on for 14 years at that point, and was really starting to feel like there was nothing keeping us together except for the fact that we were so attached. And I was just miserable. This is like 2018. And I was really starting to feel like the ethical thing to do would be to cut her loose. And, I mean, that's like it's not the respectful thing to do in a relationship. Somebody loves you, you don't make up their mind for them, I guess. But, it wasn't looking good. And, and Austin is, speaking of Elon Musk, Austin is imploding under its own, like literally,
growth.
Like there's too many people there, and it's bearing on the water table in a way that they had to start piping water in. And then the Permian pipeline actually collapsed into the karst while they were building it. I used to work for a water conservation agency, the Safer Springs Alliance in Austin, and it was the hardship of standing up as an ecological conservation advocate that convinced me that I was on a sinking ship, and I didn't want to stay there. And so I came out here and I played at the Sante Fe Institute's Interplanetary Festival in 2018, and I realized what an amazing, thriving creative, intellectual, and artistic community this place is. And I'd been out here a couple times, and I have close friends here, but like it really punctuated something for me. And at that moment, I was like, this is the scene. This is where I feel like I need to be. And I rejected a matched counteroffer from my employers in Austin and said, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to take this job. And then right around the same time, Nikki, my wife, and I said, even if we are going to split up yet again for like the 90th time, I'm still going to love you, and I'm not going to allow this fear of missing you and like my avoidance of being in this like confusing long distance kind of a relationship to have the effect on me that it has for all of these years. So like basically within a week and a half, I had made that commitment to her to just allow whatever's going to happen. I applied for the job, and then we found out that she was pregnant. And we're like, all right, well, here we go. This is the thing. And it's like, I don't know. It's funny that you asked this question about choice, because I don't know that choice is, I'm kind of weird about
free will.
Yeah, about free will. I think free will and the lack of free will are both sort of perceptual illusions depending on the methods by which you explore reality. Like if you're exploring reality through a sort of first person phenomenological lens, then I am aware that I'm moving my hand up to the point where I realize that there's a boundary where I'm not necessarily aware that I'm pumping my heart. But I've talked to plenty of people who in various peak experiences have in fact realized that they are responsible for maintaining the autonomic functions of their body. Sure. And it was terrifying. But then on the other end of the fence, the empirical realm, the third person world of objects and interrelationships that is disclosed through the sciences, as most people understand them, the world of matter. When you get down to the bedrock of it, either in the micro realm where, the quantum world appears to have some kind of irreducible like randomness or stochasticity to it. It's unpredictable. And the quantum physicists were all very uncomfortable with the fact that they had to admit that it looked like particles were making their own choices.
Yeah.
And then on the other end, if you look up into the macro, then it's the same thing. It looks like, we cannot, and this is the whole point of complex systems science is that these things cannot be predicted through, equations. They have to be modeled and simulated. And the point is that you just have to run the experiment and find out. And so you don't have this sort of, conclusive determinacy that so many people associate with the sort of like, Cartesian or Laplacian view of science as disclosing a world in which, but again, you're like the Buddha is saying, like, you meditate long enough and you find out that all of the things you thought you were choosing are just input output. That you are this nexus of complex causality. You're the intersection of colliding infinities.
Well, so anyway. Either way, you're right. It's a rabbit hole.
That's one choice of three.
yeah. I think that's enough. No, I think it's a kind of a clusterfuck, but whether there is free will or an illusion of free will, the subjective, your sense is that you're choosing, right? So your felt sense is that there's choice. At least mine is. And so when we're kind of like limited by language in so many ways, but so when I say like, what did you choice, that's kind of like, and then when
you don't choose to have gas, right? Like
right.
That's, but 90% of your DNA is microbiotal. So
no, I guess you just choose to hold the fart in.
You can try
for a period of time.
Yeah. That's the crisis of modernity, is like raging against the dying.
Yeah. Yeah. Holding in a fart. That's literally what it is. But Sam Harris would say, what's actually causing you to hold that fart in? Well, it's it's your backstory. It's like whatever gave you the social anxiety to not fart around other people, and so you're really just conditioned to do that, and so you're not actually choosing. So it's like it's a shit show. But either way, free will's it's one of those things we can get mired in, and I wanna ask you some other cool shit. So I want to get back to complexity, but first, since you're an evolutionary biology biologist, I guess. By training.
Not by practice.
Right,
but
right.
Yeah.
But,
I do evolve.
You've studied that, but you're also, I do evolve, but you've also, you're close to a lot of, you're in this stratosphere, this noosphere, where I think you have a good perspective and a good sense of our kind of narrative, the standard narrative of the past, the human story to now. And so maybe can you catch me up on like kind of the general narrative as far as like, short version, right? I saw you posted something like a very short history of Earth or something like that.
Oh,
right?
Henry G's book,
Yeah,
A Very
I'm
Short
looking forward to
History
that.
of the Life on Earth. I just interviewed him for Future Fossils. He's the senior editor of Nature, a paleontologist, and a fabulous human being. And I cannot recommend his book enough. Okay, it's amazing.
I'm going to read it. I'll check it out.
It's 200 pages in which he, 12 chapters in which he goes through everything from like the formation of the cosmos to actually into the future, into his own speculative evolutionary narrative about the from now until the end of life on Earth.
Cool.
And it's very, very plausible, that part of it. And we spent a good part of our conversation talking about that and just how he's able to make even everything I've said about, not being able to model systems. I'm actually in the final stretches of writing my own book about how you can look at big trends in evolutionary dynamics, and you can specify certain things about the future of life on Earth and the future of humans and technology and so on. Even though
based on those models.
Yeah, well, it's based on our understanding of what is sort of universal or consistent, or what, like Simon Conway Morris talks about strong convergence in evolutionary biology, like the idea that given one Earth gravity and specific the atmospheric composition that Earth has, that a wing is a wing is a wing,
right? And water flows downhill,
right? And water not only flows downhill, but it flows downhill every available route.
Yeah,
and so there's this in that kind of a thinking. It's you talk about evolution being tuned for maximal entropy production, and so what that means is that it's constantly evolutionary systems are constantly ordering themselves by exporting disorder metabolically. We eat, we use it to build our bodies, and then we release waste heat and excrement and sweat and so on.
So order has this like kind of relationship with chaos, where order really is chaos because it's creating chaos as a byproduct.
Right. And so, there's another piece of this, which is that niche propagation piece, which is that if you think about it, like, there's only one way to relate two objects, but then there's, what is it? Like, you've got three people, and then three people, one person can be related to this person or this person, that person can be related to this one or this one, that one can be related to this one or this one. And so like the number of relationships, as you linearly increase the number of agents in a system, the number of possible relationships increases exponentially.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey West's work at SFI is big on this. He explains this. This is why cities are this sort of like runaway social reactor thing. That's like, this is why 50% of the human species has moved into cities in the last few decades.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's and why they're taking over and why they're going to determine the future of life on this planet. So, when I think about like the evolutionary story, what I think about is this is the trend, and this is the trend that Henry G identifies as well, which is that life is constantly seeking out new opportunities and creating new opportunities for life. It's constantly mastering new environments. It's constantly being challenged. He said if there was one lesson, it's that which does not kill you makes you stronger. Life came out of the ocean many, many times. Life learned to fly many, many times. Life discovered multicellularity many, many times. Life discovered sociality many, many times. And so these symbioses and endosymbioses, and you can think about, like each cell is actually a cohort of even simpler cells in your body. Each animal cell in your body is actually a sort of city of bacteria that have learned to live together.
Which is another mind fuck. It's like it's like so many multitudes.
Right. It's turtles all the way down. So so you've got all of that going on, and then the human story, I think, actually starts in a weird way where humans stop being like whatever proto-human, the individual stops being the primary agent of import in their own lives, in our own lives,
becomes a tribe
at the emergence of the society. And suddenly we are all embedded within this thing, that we have a relationship to the society that in some ways is prior to and dominant to the relationships that we have with each other.
On a side tangent, do you think that stoned ape theory, psychedelics kind of played into that shift from primitive kind of like hunter, or not even hunter-gatherer, but primitive like treetop sort of, solo ape whatever, to social, very, very social coherence, like tribal, where colony before we're an individual type of community?
Absolutely. I mean, I will say this.
Fire probably did as well.
Well, this is the big thing. A lot of people rightly give Terence crap over... he didn't have a mechanism in place for this. Like he had an intuition, and I think his intuition was accurate, but his mechanism was like, I don't know, maybe it increases visual acuity. Well, it patently doesn't. That's been studied and disproven. But Richard Doyle at Penn State, and this is something I was wanting to prosecute for years, and I was never, I had fallen out of academia, and so I wasn't actually getting to do this research. But then I found this book, Darwin's Pharmacy, thanks to Eric Davis, because Rich was on his show back in 2011 and 12. And Rich Doyle wrote this book about, the subtitle was Sex, Plants, and the Evolution of the Noosphere.
Okay.
And what he was saying was basically that in the language that I understand it, okay, so like my introduction to complex systems actually came from a paper by Martin Nowak and Josh Plotkin at Princeton called The Evolution of Syntactic Communication. And I didn't realize until I came to SFI that it was building on a preliminary paper that was co-authored by David Krakauer, who's my boss now. And so it's in a weird way, I've spiraled back to precisely the people that knocked me out of academia in the first place. Because suddenly I was like, it wasn't enough to be curious about like dinosaurs. Like suddenly I had these huge questions about the evolution of consciousness and language and so on. But the evolution of syntactic communication talks about...
By syntactic, can you describe that?
Like subject, verb, object. Okay. Like, structures of sentences. Like each word has a different function, and they're like parts that we assemble into these composites.
So you learn the things separately, and then you can assemble them. So you can infinite combinations of...
That's a strategy that emerges in an adaptive response to what they called the error catastrophe, which in chaos theoretical terms is like basically if you have a simple proto-language in which you're only using like single utterances to describe an entire phenomenon, like jaguar attacking me, or whatever, then as your world becomes more complex, which is happening because of the ratcheting process I'm talking about here, as your world becomes more complex, then eventually it becomes a tax on your memory to remember the right word for every scenario.
Yeah.
And because as our social groups got larger and larger, the society itself became this sort of recombinant generator of new relevance, new scenarios that we needed to learn to communicate to one another. Eventually there became a threshold where we began miscommunicating more often than not and needed to evolve syntax in order to maintain the social cohesion that was necessary for our survival. So Richard Doyle takes this a step further, and he says he's arguing in Darwin's Pharmacy that what really precipitated this, what really kicked this over the waterfall as far as language and art and music and everything that we think of as, really truly human, which of course Henry G. points as is actually before Homo sapiens. Like Neanderthals had culture, even like, other hominids before that had, some form of, a primitive culture. And so it's not really clear. We don't know from the fossil record exactly when this happened, but the point is that people have been eating mushrooms for a very long time.
Yeah.
And Doyle argues that basically the experience of what he calls the ecodelic experience out of a sensitivity to the way that we speak about these things programs our own understanding and thus our experience of them.
Can you say that again?
He says the ecodelic experience is a better way of describing it, in his opinion, than the psychedelic experience, because what these substances really disclose to us is the way that the self and the other are not actually these binary categories that we normally understand them in our sort of modern sense,
right?
But that these constructs are dynamically intertwined and enfolded over one another. And he leans on like hyperbolic mathematics, like thinking of like the growth patterns that determine the effloration of a coral reefs and these kinds of things, and like what Darwin called the tangled bank of symbiotic relationships that defines the evolutionary.
So everything's hooked process. To everything else.
Everything is hooked to and co-determining everything else. And Doyle, to his great credit, and he has earned my undying respect for this, identified and built on Darwin's Descent of Man, in which he talks about sexual selection, said sexual selection is actually what was driving the Stoned Ape hypothesis, because your ability to venture forward, as we were talking about earlier, your ability to venture out onto the edges of the known and then report back cogently, to be able to, as Terence said, the mushrooms enabled him to be able to eloquently articulate the weird shit you're seeing there out at the edge of whatever. That is a performance of brain fitness,
right?
That you're demonstrating that you're capable of enduring these ordeals,
so you're fit to mate with,
and then you're communicating them, and maybe you're doing this in song, or maybe you're doing this around the story fire or whatever, and so of course those are the people that are going to get fucked. And so, he was basically just saying, like, the weirder the experiences and the more eloquent people are at having them, and that this is what ultimately drove the evolution of everything that we know. And so
interesting. Yeah. I think there's probably there's probably other elements to it as well, right? Like, I mean, if you've taken a massive dose of mushrooms, you probably came back a little bit more empathetic for other beings, because it's like if you do have that like syntactical construct of narrative of everything that you're seeing is kind of constructed through syntax, through this like kind of monologue and this narrative that's been playing out in your mind. Mushrooms will just completely blow that shit away, just like dissolve it, to where you're experiencing something maybe beyond syntactical construct, right? So it's like now you got to come back from that experience where maybe you were experiencing some kind of unicity or something that, could very well have changed your perspective of the other, right? And made you a more empathetic tribesman, brother, friend, etc. Which is an evolutionary advantage as well. Probably another one for sexual selection, I would imagine.
Well, another thing that tryptamines for sure, and I think other groups of psychedelics do as well, is they downregulate the default mode network. And Richard Doyle's mentor, Gary Weber, emeritus at Penn State, has a blog called Happiness Beyond Thought, where this guy's an interesting case. He's an outlying data point in a brain imaging study of over 1,000 advanced meditators that were nominated by their communities of spiritual practice as awakened individuals. And this guy had the least activity in the parts of his brain responsible for episodic autobiographical memory, which is like, organizing your sense of self in time, as well as the sort of boundary of yourself from everything else in space. And the most lucid dude I have ever spoken to, I had a Skype call with him a few years ago and was just amazed at how present and together he was, in spite of his advanced age. And so, yeah, I think that's another piece of it too, which is that, phenomenologically, these, and I don't think there's any way to contest this, that like, this was a huge piece of social cohesion. Like anybody who's been in a cuddle puddle at Burning Man will tell you that, if you don't
dissolves boundaries,
if
right?
you don't know where you stop and your friend starts, then you're kind of in this like, you bond with people in that way. That actually is, the reason why, oh God, who was I just listening to on Andrew Huberman's podcast? The Stanford, oh God, what was the guy's name? He was a psychedelic researcher.
Roland Griffiths?
No, Matt something. But he was talking about how like they get into this thing where they have to, And Tim Leary said the same thing. You have to caution people not to not to basically ask someone to marry you or decide that you're going to break up with somebody right after a trip. Like you got to give some time for the waves to settle back down.
Yeah.
But it is sort of, it strikes me as sort of akin to, and in a way, this is more serious than I'm making it sound. But like, you think about people going into war together, and the bonds that are formed in battle. And I just think about, the challenge to the boundary of the self and the confrontation with the death of the self construct that is so prominent in high dose psychedelic experiences, leads to, I remember there's a Burning Man 2010 where my friends and I took acid on the night of the burn. And I didn't know most of those people, 24 hours before, but we formed this like pod of 7 people. Like one guy had the sunflower staff. At any time, one person had the staff, and we just sort of followed whoever had the staff, and we all, we huddled together for warmth, and we moved as a single entity, and we were kind of performing the advent of multicellularity right there. Like there it was. We were kind of like it was like a stage play of the early human tribal formation. 7 people find each other and become one mind. So this is real stuff, and I think that to some extent, although the story's complicated, to some extent this is what's happening to us online. And even as we become more and more polarized, it's part of the polarization is because we are becoming more and more exposed to one another, and some of the new boundaries that are forming between individuals and social groups strike me as kind of akin to the way that people with autism spectrum disorders or neurodivergent brain structure are actually highly empathic, but learn to avert eye contact, and they don't. Many of them don't learn to properly socialize, because the world of other human beings is just so painfully intense. And so this is the one thing that was not really appreciated in the unification rhetoric of 1990s World Wide Web futurism, which was that actually being telepathic with everybody else on the planet is very, very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. And so anyway.
So you got to filter what you're searching, what you're seeing online. It can be, if you're doom scrolling down like a horrific news feed of just all the bad shit that's going on in the world, it can be very, very rough. So fire and music definitely also played a role in just the mushrooms, right? Like those are cohesion catalysts as well. And I've experienced I don't know if you've ever experienced like a hive mind at a festival and like some trance music or something. Like that's, it's weird how it feels very primitive, like that just this synchronizing with the same beat, the same sort of rhythm can do that as well. But we tangentially went down this hole. So to take it back to humans forming tribes, right? And then take us from there to, cities.
Well, I mean, honestly, Scott Ortman at CU Boulder, who's an SFI external professor, has done some really interesting work on prehistoric urban scaling.
Well, and real quick, most of it has been, as far as, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the record that we're aware of is tribal. It's hunter-gatherer tribal.
Cities are
what we consider Homo sapiens.
So Homo sapiens is, I want to say a few 100,000 years old. But really, like the oldest musical instruments are 40,000 years old, like swan bone flutes and that kind of thing. The oldest sculptures, like the Lauenmensch sculpture from I think Germany is about 40,000 years old. There was definitely a punctuation around that time, but anatomically modern humans predate that considerably. Right.
But you have an explosion of like creativity and culture, like you have cave art and you have these types of things emerging 50,000 years ago.
But even so, again, Homo erectus and other hominids were scratching, grids into rocks and stuff like this well before that. And Henry G talks about that in his book. And so there was still a sort of embryo or intuition or curiosity
trying to come to life
of pattern and of, an understanding of something that was being expressed in this way for a very long time before it started taking on more sort of recognizable symbolic forms. But so then after that, and I talked about this, speaking of van life, Chris Ryan.
Yeah. I love that episode. And that's why I wanted to bring this up actually, partly because, he kind of argues a little bit against the standard narrative, the kind of Malthusian perspective that life has always kind of pretty rough, and it's kind of been this linear sort of progressive path of progress that humans have been on from Stone Age to now. So yeah, I wanted to kind of get like your perspective on the narrative, but also if your perspective, your opinion differs from or goes off a little bit from the narrative.
I mean, not at all. I mean, I think Chris Ryan's argument that civilization is a mistake that we fell into out of hardship, because we were making do in an unstable environment, and we couldn't hunt and gather in the way that we had, and so we started digging trenches from the river to the trees and realized that we can irrigate this stuff, and then we started planting seeds and so on, and we just kept falling deeper and deeper into that niche, that trap of learning to control our environment and becoming in our sort of estimation of it more and more separate from that environment. Well, that's actually not all that different from what Henry G talks about as this another sort of general evolutionary theme of the hardship of life is what forges these cohorts and these symbiotic collaborations and these, the holobiont that you and I are as this galaxy of collaborating creatures. And like Richard Dawkins, God bless him, he says, that we're effectively just a spaceship for DNA to propagate itself. And there's some truth to that. I mean, he's not a complete asshat. He's a smart guy. But at any rate, stay in your lane. Yeah. But he, who should I tell anybody that? But there is this sense in which, or the way that Henry G puts it is that we are fish that evolved for negative depth, that we're fish in spacesuits, which again, was it Carl Zimmer, I think, who wrote Your Inner Fish, which is another really good evolutionary biology book talking about, the way that we are effectively, like, if you think about like the gills, like our ear is actually the tympanum, the eardrum is actually a closed over gill slit.
Such a trip.
and like the jaw was originally just a rod of cartilage that was like holding this mouth open for this like weird like slug thing. So I mean, like all of this stuff we're like in a very literal way, we are sort of like the clay that has been folded over and over and over in itself, as a way of creating new insulatory layers against environmental instability. And I think that, like, again, that's why, even though civilization has been very, very cruel in some respects, and I think Chris Ryan's argument is completely sound, but it's also the case that it does confer these other benefits. And it's just a very complicated story.
Yeah, it is. And I don't think he's arguing that we're going back either. Like you can't.
Not at all.
You can't put it back in the hat. But I think I think that it's worth questioning the whole narrative of, we're at some sort of like peak of progress. I mean, when you look at like the Great Pyramid of Giza, it seems like we've forgotten something. We've forgotten a bunch of things, probably.
Probably forgotten more than we know.
Yeah, way more than we know. And so, are you familiar with the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis?
Yes.
Okay.
Although that dude who stormed the Capitol was also a fan of that, so I got
was he?
The antlers guys or
was
the
he?
horns. Yeah. So it's funny. I was just telling a friend, not to derail you here, but I was just telling a friend that like that guy publicly espoused a lot of the things that I find very interesting, and I kind of indulge as like, armchair alternative theories. And I told him, I was like, look, it's not the content, it's the structure. Like you can't, like, this is actually weaponized against subcultures and countercultures, that, they say, oh my God, psychedelics led to Charlie Manson. It's like, well, yeah, but was that really, it's not the point, it's, I mean, that's like, yeah. So at any rate, I think that it's important to separate sort of, the content of someone's beliefs from the actual sort of emotional motivations and in a like adult developmental psychology sense, like the content of consciousness in which they're operating.
Well, here I'd like to just, the whole kind of intention with all of these podcasts I'm trying to do is like a dialogos where we can hopefully find some sort of emergent logos, right? Like that's sort of the idea.
Yeah.
Is and just like let the ideas be the ideas and not be married to the ideas.
Yeah. I'm no expert. So the point is, I'm no expert. I think it's interesting. I think the debate is interesting around it. But go on.
Well, the reason I'm a big fan of I would love to have a conversation with Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock, or a couple of the guys that are kind of voices for this theory. But the theory seems to have some legs, and I think it's at least worth considering why we've got like, anatomically modern humans for, X amount of hundreds of thousands of years or whatever, and then, just like civilization in the last few thousand. So there's, if that's the whole story, and like we've only done this once, and this is like the first time, but when you look over the geological record and there's just like catastrophe after like ice age, after like impact, after like, all these kind of crazy fucked up conditions that would have completely wiped the slate clean. And they actually happen fairly reliably over like 100,000 year period. It's like, it's pretty common in terms of, if you look back at the geological record, I guess. So I'm not an expert either, but I think that it's really fascinating to at least weave in these other perspectives and ask the question, why the fuck is the Sphinx there? Why does it have the weathering that it has around it? How the fuck did even if the Sphinx is as old as they say it is, which it can't be, but like, even if it was, how did the pyramid get there? How did they build it? That's to me a question worth asking, because it makes you sort of, it makes you at least consider the fact that we don't understand the past. Like, and like you were talking about pluralistic, what'd you call it? Theoretical pluralism. So it's like being able to, getting out of being pigeonholed to one way of seeing the past because, I'm an archaeologist and I know, or whatever it is, right? It's like, there's a mystery to be solved. There's a fucking mystery to be solved, in my opinion.
Well, I will say that, for me, I think one of the more important things that I learned in my teenage years when I was out there with Bob Bacher doing field work in Wyoming in the Como Bluff dinosaur quarries was what you call like taphonomic or preservation bias in the fossil record, which is that really, except in rare instances in what are called like Lagerstätten, that these are like areas of immensely exquisite, unbelievably perfect preservation, like the Burgess Shale, or the Liaoning province where all the feathered dinosaurs are coming out of China. These places, you don't get soft-bodied organisms. You don't get integument like skin and feathers. There was like an ankylosaur that was discovered a few years ago that still had like its brain structure was preserved, and it was like, what the hell? Like these are sacred objects because they're so unbelievably rare. And the truth is that because of erosion and because of biases in just the way that fossils are produced in the first place, and this is true not just of fossils of organisms, but of artifacts and of trace fossils of the movement of organisms as well, that the most we're ever going to know about the history of the planet is like a few % of what was actually there. And this is especially true in the case of, these people that are making the argument for a lost civilization, that are pointing to the fact that, humans, we know that early human societies were waterside societies, and the water levels are much higher than they were now. And so we're not looking offshore for these things. And so if we ignore the offshore,
which is where they would be,
evidence, then we're ignoring the evidence, the only evidence that we have.
Which is going to be very limited evidence because it's been underwater for 10,000 plus years.
Right. And on top of that, we're not talking about societies that necessarily gave a damn about metal. And so, this is something I brought up with Kevin Kelly, who has repeatedly made the argument that technology preserves itself and that we've never lost anything.
Yeah, and I listened to that. It was a great point.
I was like, dude, there's no way that's true, because it's not just the pyramids. I mean, I think that there's actually a pretty plausible explanation for how the pyramids were constructed at this point, but like
can you articulate it?
Well, I mean, it's just, there's the teamwork about like the way that,
well, it'd be pulleys and moving it around. Yeah, sure. I can see floating giant stones on barges. What I can't see is cutting like multiple 1,000-pound blocks of limestone. I mean, so
I'm definitely on the sort of weird tip with like the Coral Castle and the idea that there might have been some sort of like acoustic levitation involved.
Well, there's something weird about it, because even
who knows?
Because like the theory of like they use bronze saws. Humans use bronze saws to just kind of saw our way through. Where are the sawtooth marks on those blocks? Not to mention the fact that a bronze saw just breaks after like a few inches doing that. It's like the most ridiculous like theory. It's a theory to kind of keep a story from falling apart, in my opinion. And I think that there's probably some people who have, a lot invested in that story being maintained, and they don't want it to see it change. But like even more mysterious than the limestone, now they found like there's granite blocks. You need like a diamond blade to cut that shit. Like, how are they even cutting the stone?
Tons of megalithic monuments that make no sense.
They don't make sense. So I'm not saying that the aliens did it or anything like that. I think it's a mystery. I mean, they could have, but it's a mystery. It's worth asking the questions, and like let's go about it, with an open mind and a beginner's mind, a child's mind, and be like, wait, how the fuck?
If I'm going to ironically fly any flag into battle, it's going to be the flag of epistemic humility. Like if I'm sure of one thing,
I know nothing.
It's that I don't really know what's going on. So there's that, and so that's why it's so important. All the things I've said up to this point, that's why it's so important to when you come across a unifying pattern, a regularity in the observable world that you can say provides limits to or constraints on what we can claim is or is not the case. Like this is a big thing in terms of like the developmental biases in evolution, and the fact that there is a telos or a direction in some sense to the evolution of the biosphere. Again, like Jeffrey West and others have said, look, you plot all of the animals that exist, and it's like it's a line along this logarithmic plot of all the animals that could exist and don't.
Right.
They all fall on this line. And why is that? And it's because of allometric biophysical scaling properties that have to do with the ability of transport networks like the cardiovascular system or the pulmonary system to move nutrients through the body, and the way that those three-dimensional networks scale as an organism grows.
Right.
And so this is, I mean, there's like, you can't, Chris Kempis has worked with Jeffrey West at SFI on explaining how this leads to, it's not just natural selection and random mutation. There are strong biophysical constraints on what can even exist and what can be selected for that result in things like, why are trees a certain height now, and why were trees capable of reaching a different height 100 million years ago. And it has to do with like, the atmospheric composition and the gravity and how much how far water can transpire up the root of the trunk of a tree.
Gravity and all that.
Yeah.
So on that note, you've got these constants like, the water's flowing downhill. Okay, well, we look around, we have civilization. So would that I know that this might not hold legs, but like, could you make the logical argument that the fact that this all exists is sort of proof that there is some sort of constant that has led to, it's fertile ground for this to occur, for civilization to grow, to emerge. So, and it would support the alternative armchair theory or whatever that, human beings we have lost something, that Atlantis wasn't just a fairy tale, that Plato wasn't just, talking out of his ass, and that he was actually recounting something that the Egyptians had told, his ancestor Solon, and the Egyptians weren't just talking out of their ass, and they were actually saying, 9,000 years ago, everything got swallowed up by the fucking sea, and like Atlantis was lost in a day. And then, 2,600 years from Plato to now, plus the 9,000, gives you 11,600 years, which lands right in a Younger Dryas, time frame that is just a horrendous time to be a human on Earth, or anything on Earth, really. You lose like massive amounts of megafauna in North America during that period. You have like 300-400 feet of sea level rise during that period. So it's like you've got like both a mythical tradition.
You don't need a common impact for that, by the way. I mean, that could easily have happened by other means, but the fact is that we still saw that 400
whether it's a comet or not, like whatever could get that much ice to become liquefied or to turn to water that quickly, like Meltwater Pulse 1b, which rips the fucking land of the Northwest into the scablands, turns it into. Have you been to the Gorge, like up in Washington?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So that's like the channeled scablands are just like absolutely, caused by incredible flooding. So, just absolutely apocalyptic amounts of water.
Who was it that was just critiquing Carlson on this point? I don't know.
I'd love to see that, because
I
want to get both perspectives.
But it is. It is funny, because I think that this argument is so characteristic of people involved in these deep time inquiries, because it's the argument between gradualism and catastrophism. Ultimately, it's how fast is change happening?
Yes.
And that's a silly question, of course, because it's happening at all of these.
It's always changing.
It's the same question as the multi-level selection question in evolutionary biology. Is evolution only acting on the gene? No. It's acting at every imaginable order of organization at the same time, and so you can ask meaningful and rigorous questions like, so did the scablands happen in years or thousands of years, or
hundreds of millions, right? It's important to know if that happened quickly in a catastrophe, like something that melted the North American ice cap, or if it happened gradually over hundreds of millions of years.
But I suspect that people tend to take sides in this argument for what are ultimately sort of like autobiographical reasons that have more to do with the way, again, that each of us has come up into the world with expectations based on things like the stability or the traumatic instability of our own childhood environment.
We're always...
you find out that like the people... Like, it was interesting, I was talking about this with Henry G. A lot of the great fantasists and science fiction authors of the 20th century were ambulance drivers in the First World War.
I see.
Who did... Disney, Tolkien... And
they just saw the horror of it.
A few others, and jazz musicians and all these things. Like, there was this effloration of catastrophist thinking and nonlinearity and the whole field of complex system science came out of the world wars, and like all of this stuff came thanks to cybernetics. So it's like there's something about like the trauma and our expectations that's what we're seeing in the fossil record, I think.
But
anyway,
on that note, though, like before 1970, and you've studied dinosaurs, right? Like, I'm sure you're a fan of dinosaurs. So, but before 1970s, like there was nobody saying that they were eliminated in a horrific catastrophe 60 million years ago.
Yeah, that was Lewis and Walter Alvarez that said that.
Yeah, and so they had to shift a paradigm, and they had to probably for like a decade fight a bunch of people telling them that they're whack jobs, right? And that they're like off their rocker, and that the shit doesn't happen like that. And so it's a gradual change how we like wake up collectively to change the story.
But if you zoom out in the fossil record, I mean, we found conclusive evidence for that within a couple decades, and it happened in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
So it really it's the frame, it's the scale of reference. But yeah.
But with the with the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, for example, I mean, it doesn't have to come from an impact. I'm not married to the theory at all. I think that when you look at something,
to multiple theories.
when you look at something like the Pyramid of Giza, it's like, okay, so we were capable of doing some shit, and we forgot. 100%. Like, that's just guaranteed. Like, that I have proof of that because the pyramid's there. So I don't need, like a crater to prove of like that civilization came before and stuff. I have proof that we built a pyramid and now we probably couldn't do that same thing in that same scale right now. So it's like, it's impressive on a very deep level. It's mysterious on a deep level. And I think that for me right now, I think the standard narrative of like, we've kind of, come along and evolved and here we are, versus like, maybe we've built up a bunch of sandcastles and they keep getting washed away. Maybe that's how it goes. Yeah. Because it's like there might be a constant, like we converge, we find coherence, we start to build shit, we get creative, we get surplus, we get a workforce, we get abundance, etc. And then we make art, we fucking build skyscrapers, whatever we do. We have this tendency to do stuff, but if you put that in the perspective, the context rather, of the shooting gallery that we're flying through called infinity, and we're passing through meteor streams twice a year, every year, all the time. So it's like we're in this cosmic environment. We're not just isolated. I mean, the Holocene is an example of like a pretty rare period where it's like things have been really good and the conditions for life have been great, right? So it's like, I don't think that that's permanent, obviously. And if you look back over time, the climate science is pretty conclusive that it's like been pretty sporadic and horrific. And well, anyways, now we're in the Anthropocene. Things aren't, necessarily great for life for a different reason. That's us. And so maybe that's part of the balance, right? Part of the cycle is it's like we get too big or something, and then it kind of recalibrates, it rebalances. We don't have a lot of time, and I want to bridge from the past and paleontology and stuff into the now and complexity. And so you're SFI, you're very familiar with complexity. Can you give a kind of dummied down version of what complexity is, and talk about how what I'm really interested in, I guess, is how we're in a complex system called the Anthropocene, Homo sapiens trying to fucking interrelate and interoperate and work with each other and not kill each other and not kill everything else and not just like blow each other up. And Putin's got his finger relatively close to a button.
Most of us are concerned about that. Clearly not all of us.
Yeah, it's trippy. Pretty weird that one person's like in the seat. But complexity is like this thing that like obviously, there's our timer. God damn. So well, maybe we'll just finish this last riff.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tie it into DAOs and blockchain. So like, I think of what's happening right now in the Web3 blockchain space as complexity, as, this emergence of human coordination and coherence in a way, and us trying to solve really what I consider to be like a meta problem, which is the problem of human coordination. So it's like, if we can solve that problem, we can tackle all the, the climate change problem and the bigger problems, right? Like, because we can actually we can get on some sort of common vibration that is like, hey, protect ocean. Hey, don't let people starve to death. Like things that are pretty basic, protect the water. Like those things they're obvious. If we can start to find that kind of coherence, and I'm optimistic that DAOs and blockchain hopefully can give rise to some sort of like emergent coherence that allows us to solve these bigger issues. Maybe I'm just being like naively optimistic, and I'm wondering, like, with your perspective on complexity, what's your take on where we're at now, and do you find any excuses for optimism?
Well, I mean, yes and no to everything you just said, right? Because like you were alluding to a moment ago, and I think we've kind of made clear through this whole conversation, I'm actually less concerned about exogenous shocks like a meteor impact than I am about endogenous shocks like us spiraling out of control because we're generating so much novelty. Like this is, Stuart Kaufman at the Sante Fe Institute, I interviewed for, or formerly at SFI, I interviewed him for Future Fossils episode 125, and he's a brilliant guy who came up with this notion of the adjacent possible, which is that, that this is what we've been talking about, that the complex, living systems are constantly expanding the sort of surface area of what's available through these recombinant adaptive processes. And as you do that, then you get into a situation exactly like every empire has ever, which is that you end up having to sort of regulate a border and a territory that is bigger than you're capable of regulating. And so the whole thing ultimately ends up like Kyle Harper has written about with respect to the fall of Rome. Rome ends up collapsing in part due to epidemic shocks and in part due to, the barbarians at the gates and so on. And, it's
kind of under its own weight in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. And like Austin, Texas, like that, you're just at this point where the very reason that cities are so great is also the reason that they're so horrible. And Vicky Yang and Chris Kempis and Jeffrey West and a few others at SFI wrote this piece, I think last year, on how actually when you actually you decompose the data, cities, per capita income in a city, it scales super linearly, so that it on average, somebody's in a city twice the size of another city is making more than twice as much. It goes up by like 1.15.
If you're in a bigger city, you're going to make more money because there's more opportunity, there's more connections.
Except what they actually see is that most of that wealth is condensing at the very top, and that the poor are not getting any richer in these big cities. They're only getting more populous. And so, and this is generally, like, inequality is actually what's growing faster than per capita income.
Right.
And so, and this can be seen in a much more generic sense with respect to one of the foundational papers of complex systems thinking, which ultimately, to answer your question, complex systems is sort of about these what David Krakauer would call adaptive matter. It's about systems that cannot be understood through, again, equations, that have to be understood as having emergent properties that occur due to the intersection of the relational dynamics between agents, and so can only really be understood through simulations and behavioral models and so on.
And so, in other words, unpredictable, completely
right. So
unpredictable.
there's kind of two strains in science. One is complex systems thinking, which offers us understanding, but it not predictive power. And then there's machine learning, which offers us predictive power, but we can't understand how it works.
I see.
And so this is the trade-off is between prediction and understanding. This is why these two things need each other.
Right.
And so anyway, the point is that I see, in keeping with Jeffrey West's thing, I interviewed him for episodes 35 and 36 of Complexity. And we talked about what he calls the finite time singularity, which is this ratcheting, ever accelerating crisis innovation cycle in civilization, where we solve a problem, but the problem creates a new problem that has to be solved even faster than the last problem. And at what point are you basically then, like every new pitching machine you put on the field, you suddenly the balls are coming at you faster than you can swat them, and one of them is going to take you out. And so it's not the comets, it's the epidemics that are happening because of deforestation in the wild game market. Andrew Dobson's written about this, that if we could just put, I forget what he said, a global budget of $20 billion, it would save us trillions in preventing the next pandemic if we could curb deforestation and prevent more zoonotic plagues from erupting out and destroying us all.
Yeah, if we could just do a good job of preserving a fair percentage of wildlife wilderness, we would be doing a huge favor.
At the same time, the whole thing that we love about technology is that it expands the surface area of the possible, and we're addicted to this. And so, it's really, really hard to, basically, I think any sane person is going to accept that we're going through this weird sort of metamorphosis where certain things are blooming at the same time that other things are for sure, without question, going to collapse. And it's just a question of what's going to collapse and how much, and what's going to bloom in its place.
Which is what I see blockchain kind of doing, or trying to do.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's tricky and contentious. And I've been a supporter of, I've been an curious about and advocate of blockchain technology for years now. But it is still, I am, if you can't tell by now, I am deeply ambivalent about pretty much anything, because there's always multiple frames with which to think about this stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I see blockchain as a solution, but it's also going to it's already causing problems. And, and so it's not like people who evangelize these technologies tend to be stakeholders that are demonstrating their cognitive bias because they've made money on an investment and it's changed their life in a positive way. And so they're willing to turn a blind eye to the new externalities that are created or the old externalities that are amplified in these, as these technologies mature. And I mean, that's as true of blockchain as it was true of the internet in the first place. It's as true of radio and television. Like anybody, read some history and just get a sense for the way that people were rhapsodizing radio back in the 30s and television and just appreciate the fact that nobody saw that Hitler was going to use radio to conquer Europe.
Right.
People weren't thinking about this shit. And the same is true of blockchain. It's a double-edged sword. All of these things, we are going to cut ourselves on them. But the people that are trying to shut these things down are I'm really disappointed in Elizabeth Warren right now, and Biden, and the way that they're seeing this purely in the frame of old person afraid of
new technology.
Money laundering. Who's done the most? Still to this day, the vast majority of money laundering is done with cash.
Yeah.
It's not done with a public ledger.
Right.
Are you kidding me?
It's perfectly traceable.
They caught the Silk Road people. Those people are in jail. It's ridiculous. I mean, they're shadow boxing.
Yeah.
And so I'm angry at both sides of this situation. I'm angry at the people that are like, Bitcoin's going to save us all. It's like, read a book. And I'm angry at the people that are like, we have to destroy, we have to stop history from happening. It's like, no, what we need to do is we need to act like the Cosmic Care or Dance Safe at festivals and think about it in terms of a harm reduction mentality. I gave a talk at Burning Man a few years ago on technology as psychedelic parenting. And maybe this is the thing that we can loop all of this together. I think that was episode 75 or 76, where we said, I said that basically every technology has an agency of its own. You release it into the wild. It's like Jurassic Park. It's going to breed and it's going to take on its own new identity, and it's going to evolve relationships with other things that you couldn't possibly have predicted. And this is why we need to think more carefully both about the incubation of technologies as well as intellectual property law and, open source and these kinds of things, because we actually want a village of people raising these tools. I think OpenAI basically consolidating and becoming this Microsoft owned thing where AI is now the province of big corporations is a goddamn disaster.
Yeah, it is.
And we really to the degree that we need to be concerned about artificial stupidity, badly designed AI, under delivering on these insane promises that people are making for money. We need to curb that, and we need to think about this more as an issue. Again, I don't know, Diane Coyle wrote about this in terms of nationalizing social media, and I think her point was sound that we don't want certain things to be evolving only according to the dynamics of the market and the incentives of the markets. We have to understand that these things have become public infrastructure and thus must remain in the commons, must remain in the public domain.
And I see something like a DAO being some sort of container for the commons in some way. I mean, maybe if we're here to be stewards. You had a great conversation with Tyson Yunkaporta on your podcast, Future Fossils, and he talks about that a lot in his book about being stewards, kind of like caretakers of the planet. And it's sort of in a way kind of a custodian. Thank you. So, as custodians, we could be better custodians. We're pretty bad at it right now. Yeah. And it's not because we don't have the capacity. It's not because we don't have the technology or the resources or the wealth or whatever you might need, the manpower. we just don't have the fucking coherence. Like we can't come to coherence. And so like that's a problem that I think we have to solve if we're going to make it out of the pickle that Jonathan talks about,
Yeah. I mean, custodians don't just sweep things under the rug, and that's kind of what we're doing in terms of Roman Kisnarik's, how to be a good ancestor. Right now we're just exporting all of our problems to the future, and that's going to bite us in the ass.
Yeah,
it's already starting to.
Yeah, it's unsustainable. It's self-terminating, actually.
Right.
Daniel Schmachtenberger would say.
Yes, the Schmachtenmeister. Yes.
Have you talked to him?
Yeah, he was on Future Fossils episode 50 or something. I think we have a call, a personal call coming up in a month or so.
Cool. Yeah, I want to meet him for sure.
Yeah, interesting cat.
I've been holding you longer than you said you'd be here. I'm super grateful for your time, man. I'm going to ask you one bonus short one.
Sure.
You take as little time as you want.
I'll give you a haiku.
So you're actually really inspirational to me because you're not just plowing forward with the podcast, both of them, Sante Fe Institute and Future Fossils, which Future Fossils I think is I love it. And it's honestly, it's one of those things. It's one of these things where it's like I have to rewind sometimes because you like pack so
pretty fast.
Dude, you pack a lot. You're like a wordsmith and you're packing a lot in there. And to that point, you're a poet. Like you're not just saying big words. You're not just saying big words. You're actually a musician. You're very, you're weaving words together in kind of a beautiful way lots of the time. And you're an artist. So it's like and I'm not trying to just like build you up here, but I'm trying to say like from where you're at now, is there anything that you would say to a young person trying to aspire to do something besides just the 9-to-5 grind that they're in right now? They're trying to orient themselves. They're trying, this podcast and this project that I'm on is trying to figure out how to become more sovereign, how to create more authentically, and how to orient ourselves towards something meaningful like ikigai, right?
Right.
And so, do you have any advice for somebody on how to maybe put their feet on that path?
I would say serve the flourishing of the commons, be a banyan, not kudzu, dude.
Is that a haiku?
Yes, I think so. I think I got that in 17. I told this to Jim Rutt when he was asking people about, who are the people with 6-figure Twitter accounts that I should have on the Jim Rutt show. And I was like, dude, you're a wealthy boomer. Like, you don't need to be hoovering up more of the mind share. I love your stuff, but you need to realize that the podcast ecosystem, or for that matter, any ecosystem, we live in a very packed world now, and the goal is not to draw on his own sort of, game B thing that he's got with Daniel and Jordan and all these people. The goal is to serve a synergistic, flourishing ecosystem. Like here in town, Synergia Ranch, John Allen of Biosphere 2 fame, and all of these people, that friends of mine, beloved, brilliant people in the Institute of Ecotechnics. The Synergia is this principle of syntropic evolution, constantly finding these new mutually beneficial relationships. And so, don't view this as a game in which the goal is to get more points than the other guy. View it as a recognition that, to your point about Ikigai, that what we're really shooting for here, what we're really growing toward is a system that has
non-rivalrous dynamics.
That is optimized. Well, I mean, there's going to be rivalry, but even that rivalry is in service, debate. Debate is, Dan Sperber has written about a beautiful piece on this at Aeon. That rationality and debate serve collective understanding. And as long as everybody remembers that the goal is for all of us to learn and sharpen ourselves and polish the gem of our understanding together, then debate is actually a very good thing. It's when people entrench themselves into trying to win an argument that it becomes problematic. So, I mean, I would just say, look, unfortunately, you came up at a time when it's sort of hard to identify the frontier. And so you can't just strike out there as some pathologically individualistic go west young man thing that all of us, many of us listening to this, I'm sure, have inherited this sort of weird pioneer mentality that upon which the United States was, won with blood. But like now that we're here, Europe is starting to make a whole lot more sense, that like, okay, you've come up within a superstructure, and how do you navigate that? How do you serve that in a way with your life and your work? And that's the whole point of Ikigai, right? It's like doing not only what you're good at, what you enjoy, but not what you can be paid for, but what the world actually needs. That's it's important to try and find the affordances, try to find the points where those things meet. And so you can't forget that piece of it. I mean, really all successful entrepreneurs are people that, and I hate, this is a shitty note to end on, but like they're people that solved a problem, for somebody. And often they're people that sort of created that problem and then solved it, but nonetheless.
Metering the electron.
Yes, exactly. But, so that's the goal, I would say, is just find a way to be of service in a way that suits your particular gifts, and then accept the fact that you're probably going to have to continue to check in with that, and it may not be the same thing next year.
Yeah. Well said. And give yourself space to figure out what the fuck those gifts are, Like you can't find them in the cubicle of grinding. Like that's probably not going to be where they, shine out and emerge. And
you got to poke your head up out of the prairie dog hole every once in a while.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
Well, man, where can people find more of your stuff if they want to check you out?
Go to patreon.com/Michael Garfield, and there you will, or Linktree/Michael Garfield.
I'll include the links.
Yes. Buy my NFTs. I will. Those that are on dodgy blockchains, I will offset hundreds of times the carbon required for them. And that's
dodgy blockchains.
That's not a great promise, But I wasn't thinking about this clearly when I minted a lot of them last March.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's tons of music and stuff up there, artwork. I sell paintings and prints and you can find my live sets and my studio recordings and hundreds of podcast episodes.
Yeah, I don't know how you find the time to do all that shit.
I don't sleep.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's like Batman.
It's starting to make more sense.
Yeah, no, 2 kids, you don't sleep.
Dude, I need to get you in a float tank.
I would love that. Yeah. Gray Matter here in town has some good floats, but the hard part is finding time to get away from the kids and go float.
Yeah.
So we have a little like inflatable hot tub in our yard.
Nice.
That it's actually out of commission right now. I need to get it back up and running. But anyway.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Christian.
Thank you for your support and for listening to this episode of True North Project. This one with Michael Garfield. Be sure to check out Michael's Future Fossils podcast and the other stuff mentioned in this episode if you're interested. And if you want to support what we're doing here with this Odyssey, TrueNorthProject.com is where you can find our mailing list and our support link to Anchor. The support link's also going to be, both those links are in the episode description as well, so you can just do this right from your phone. And yeah, you can always leave us a good review, 5 stars, subscribe, all the things, share with friends, you know the drill. But yeah, we're loving it so far. This has been a really fun journey, and I'm super stoked and grateful to be able to have this opportunity and have these conversations and just, go wherever the open road leads me, and meet these incredible people and expand my own perspective. So really feeling pretty blessed right now to be able to do this. And if you feel like supporting it, that's just the cherry on top. So I, much love and appreciation for that. But from now, I'm going to peace out and go on a couple-week rock climbing trip in the mountains. So you probably won't hear from me for a minute unless I can break away to upload some more stuff. But yeah, much love, everybody, and enjoy this musical piece from Michael Garfield. This is called And the World Rushes In. Once again, if you check out the links I mentioned, you can find his other music there as well. Enjoy.